Hey, tonight we're walking into the wind, across a landscape that doesn't beg for your attention. It demands your silence. Out here, the land breathes slow and low, flat as a held breath, and just as tense. This is the Eurasian steppe. Thousands of miles of dry grass and bone-cold memory, stretching from Ukraine to Mongolia. The sky hangs heavy like a lid over a forgotten pot, and beneath your feet, centuries. Before we get into it, do me a favor. Like the video, subscribe if you haven't, and let me know in the comments what time it is where you are and what drew you here. Because what we're about to unearth, no, not metaphorically, literally, has been buried for thousands of years under frost, myth, and silence. All right, now into tonight's journey. Before the Huns, before the Mongols, before the Silk Road was more than a string of campsites and rumors, there were the Scythians. They didn't build cities, they didn't write books, they didn't etch their stories in stone. And still, they ruled everything from the Black Sea to the edge of China. How? Horses, bows, and a relationship with death that was intimate, theatrical, and permanent. You won't find Scythia on a modern map, but if you walk the steppe at dusk, you'll feel it. Low mounds dot the land like broken knuckles of some buried colossus. The locals call them kurgans, burial mounds, but burial is too neat a word. These weren't graves, they were monuments, to warlords, to priests, to kings so feared they were buried with their horses, their gold, and their slaves, alive. And here's the thing no one tells you. These tombs, they aren't just old, they're sealed. For over 2,000 years, frost kept them locked tight. Permafrost. That's why, when Russian archaeologists broke into a kurgan in the Altai Mountains in the 90s, they didn't just find bones. They found skin, tattooed, preserved, entire, a warrior, buried in full regalia, still wearing his fur, his weapons beside him, his hair still coiled. A prince, maybe, a ghost with muscles still intact. He was just the beginning. You see, the Scythians believed the dead should not simply be buried. They should be sent. Sent to the other world fully equipped. If you were a king, you went down with everything you'd need to rule in death. Gold cups, carpets, bridled horses, sometimes wives, concubines, servants, volunteered or not. There's a word for that kind of ceremony. Not ritual, not sacrifice, performance. They built these tombs like theaters. Timber-lined chambers under the mound, horses laid in rings, the dead placed center stage, arms folded, watching their entourage laid out like a scene they'd never leave. No light, no sound, just weight. Earth piled above, stone packed tight, sealed in frozen silence. And for centuries, they stayed untouched. But not anymore, because the ice is melting. Climate change is doing what armies and grave robbers couldn't, opening the vaults of the Scythian underworld. And what's emerging? It's not just artifacts, it's not just treasures, it's a culture that never had a voice in history, now whispering through leather scraps, decayed saddles, tattoos in spiraling animal shapes. A language of ink and instinct. This isn't Indiana Jones. No booby traps or glowing stones. Just cold rot and quiet horror. In some tombs, the bodies are curled as if still bracing for the burial. Nails torn, lips sealed with resin. In one, a woman lay beside a child, her hand still over his chest. Whether she was comforting him or holding him still, no one can say. These tombs aren't museums, they're messages, and the people inside, they were never meant to be seen again. But someone, maybe fate, maybe foolishness, is prying the lids open, and the ground is watching. Let's go back to when the steppe thundered with hooves, when the world knew to fear arrows from nowhere and warriors who vanished into grass. The Greeks wrote of them, called them savages and sorcerers. Herodotus, the so-called father of history, tried to describe them, but his words tangled like vines in the wind. He said they drank the blood of their enemies, used their skulls as drinking cups. Maybe, but what he missed was the structure, the code. Because the Scythians weren't chaos, they were order in a different dialect. They moved in family clans, kept strict ranks, respected the dead so much they built hills for them. And in their art, oh the art, they etched their beliefs not in temples but in metal. Gold plaques shaped like deer mid-leap, eagles clutching serpents, men morphing into beasts. Each piece a myth in miniature. Now picture this. You're an archaeologist standing at the mouth of a newly exposed kurgan. The wind cuts sideways. The grass flattens around you like it's bowing. You brush away dirt and find fur, still intact. A bridle, stiff with age. Then fingers, curled, human. And then the smell. It's not rot, not really. It's older, denser, like wet leather and wood smoke and something else, something wrong, like the air hasn't moved in 1,000 years, and now it knows you're there. That's when you understand. This isn't excavation, it's trespass. But still, you go in. Next time, we descend into one of the most untouched tombs ever found, a Scythian queen, buried at the edge of Siberia, surrounded by 12 horses and enough gold to drown a city. But what they found beneath her pillow, that changed everything. Let me know in the comments, have you ever walked through a graveyard that made your skin itch? Ever stood somewhere and felt watched? Not by the living? Because the tombs of the Scythian kings are open now, and they aren't. Remembering. When you picture a queen, maybe you think of velvet, of gold, of courts and candles, and the sound of polished shoes on marble. Forget that. Out here, on the edge of the Siberian permafrost, there was a queen buried under nothing but silence and ice. No crown, no throne. Just horses, earth, and the kind of cold that keeps secrets better than stone. In 1993, a team of Russian archaeologists took a helicopter deep into the Ukok Plateau, near the borders of China, Mongolia, and Kazakhstan. The wind up there doesn't blow. It peels. The landscape is pale and harsh, like the world hasn't decided whether to keep it or not. And beneath that barren tundra, they found her. They didn't know she was a queen at first, just another mound. One more kurgan rising gently from the steppe like the beginning of a question. But the scans told a different story. Inside there was wood, still whole, a sealed chamber. That meant ice. That meant preservation. That meant someone important. They started digging. Layers of stone packed tight, earth colder the deeper they went. They removed the slabs like teeth, and then fur, wool, carved wood darkened by time, and beneath it all, a coffin. The moment they lifted the lid, the air changed. She lay on her side, knees slightly drawn, like she'd fallen asleep mid-thought. Her skin was pale, stretched, waxen, but the tattoos, those were alive. Black ink swirling down her arms in shapes older than language. Deer with backward-facing horns, leopards with wings. Patterns so precise, so clean, it looked like she'd gotten them yesterday. But she'd been buried for over 2,000 years. This was the Ice Maiden of Ukok, a Scythian noblewoman, maybe a priestess, maybe a ruler. Her grave goods told a story as sharp as a dagger. 6 horses lined beside her, each with distinct bridles and saddles, each chosen, prepared, and killed, not dumped, placed. Their heads were high, their hooves aligned like they were still waiting for the command to ride, because the Altai people, indigenous tribes who live near the burial site, never wanted this tomb disturbed. They believed the Ice Maiden was a protector, a spirit who kept the balance of the region. When she was removed, they said the land stirred, and within weeks, an earthquake. Then floods, landslides, an outbreak of livestock disease. The Altai elders had, "You woke her, and now she's walking." Maybe coincidence, maybe not. But the Russian government, for once, listened. They halted excavations in that region. The Ice Maiden, after being displayed in museums, was finally returned to the Altai Republic in 20. Her tomb remained empty, but her presence had not left. And maybe that's the point. Because what these tombs reveal isn't just history, it's the edge of myth. The moment where archaeology blurs into something older, something less known, and more felt. She wasn't just preserved by ice. She was held by it. Like the land itself had decided, no, she stays. And when we forced her into light, the land responded. Next time, we go deeper into the Altai Mountains, to a tomb so remote it took weeks to reach. And what was found inside wasn't just ancient, it was wrong. Horses stitched with gold, a warrior whose skull had been opened and sealed again, and a death mask that wasn't made of metal, but bone. Let me know in the comments. Do you believe in curses, in guardians, in the idea that some tombs aren't meant to be opened? Because the Scythians built their graves like fortresses, not to keep the world out, but to keep something else in. The Altai Mountains don't give up their dead easily. They rise like scars at the border of Russia, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, and China, a place where maps fade and compasses lie. For centuries, only reindeer herders and the occasional shaman braved these ridges. And for good reason. The wind sounds wrong up here, Ri. It doesn't move through the mountains. It circles them, like it's guarding something. And in 2006, a team of archaeologists found out what. They were following a rumor, just that. A bulge in the earth that didn't match the terrain. An unnatural rise, like a buried knuckle under frost. It took days just to reach it. Horses collapsed. Equipment froze. Half the team wanted to turn back. But then they found the stones, stacked in a perfect circle. Just like every Scythian burial mound, a kurgan, wrapped in silence and intent. These weren't graves. These were vaults. And once you opened one, you couldn't close it again. They began to dig. The outer wall was ringed with sacrificed horses. Not unusual, but these were different. Their skins had been stitched with strips of gold leaf, their manes braided with human hair, their mouths filled with iron bits shaped like snarling wolves. Then the chamber, sealed with larchwood preserved by the permafrost, the kind of tomb that had not seen air for 2,000 years. When they broke it open, the cold poured out like a breath, and what lay inside shouldn't have been there. Not in this condition, not after this long. The man, or what was left of him, was buried in full regalia. Scale armor of bronze and rawhide, a dagger still tucked into his belt, his boots reinforced with bone splints. But it was his head that stopped the dig, because it wasn't a head at all. It was a mask, not gold, not wood, bone, carefully carved, smoothed, hollowed to fit over his skull, not decorative, functional, and not just any bone, human, from multiple sources, as if someone had built him a new face from the dead. Why? Because his real face was gone, cleaned, cut, removed. The mask didn't replace it. It became it. And then the team made an even darker discovery. The skull underneath had been opened, a neat circular hole bone, red into the top. Not a battle wound, a surgical cut. Trepanation, a practice ancient cultures used to relieve pressure, cure madness, or invite visions. But here's the twist. The hole had been healed, which meant this warrior had survived it, lived for years after the operation, fought, commanded, died not from injury, but from intention. So what kind of man survives brain surgery in 400 BC? What kind of leader gets a mask made from other people? What kind of tomb is sealed so well that not even bacteria dare enter? You don't bury a man like that to honor him. You bury him to contain him. Other items in the chamber only deepened the mystery. A bronze mirror with no reflection, its surface blackened, polished not to show your face but maybe something else. Bowls with residue of Amanita muscaria, fly agaric, a powerful hallucinogen, used in rituals, often lethal, always sacred, and carved into the chamber walls. Not writing, but etchings, spirals, antlers, eyes, over and over, watching. They'd seen something, or believed they had, something that needed armor beyond flesh, and a tomb beyond reach. The team documented everything, photographed, measured, preserved. But one thing went wrong. A week after the tomb was opened, the lead archaeologist, a man in his 40s, healthy, no prior conditions, suffered a stroke. Not at the site. Back in Novosibirsk, in his sleep. His last words, according to his wife, the man with no face. Coincidence? Or something deeper? Because across the steppe, stories still linger. Oral histories passed in smoke and song, of kings who returned from death, of warriors too violent to rest, of mask men, warlords whose eyes never closed, even in the dark. The Scythians didn't write anything down. They didn't have temples or libraries. Their history was muscle and memory. But maybe they left messages, carved into bone, buried in ice, locked behind layers of silence. And we, with our shovels and scanners, keep pressing deeper, because what lies at the bottom of these tombs isn't just death, it's design. Some scholars now believe the Scythians weren't just burying their elite, they were enacting rituals. Every object placed just so, every sacrifice chosen with care. The tombs are diagrams, maps, not of places, but of ideas. And when you disturb a diagram, you change the meaning. Next time, we ride north, toward the Dnieper River, where a tomb was discovered containing 2 warriors in the same coffin. Both male, both powerful, but one had a broken sword. The other had no wounds at all, and yet the blade was placed on his chest. So who was the true king? And what happened to the one who lived? In the farthest reaches of the Altai Mountains, where the wind scours the peaks and silence has ruled for millennia, the frozen earth guards a memory long forgotten. Beneath layers of permafrost and time lie the whispers of a vanished people. Not etched in stone, but sealed in ice. Here, the Pazyryk Valley stretches wide and bare, unremarkable to the untrained eye. Yet it was this very barrenness that first drew Soviet archaeologists to its bleak embrace in the 1920s. What they found there would rewrite the myth of the Scythians. Sound, shovel scraping frozen earth, a sudden crack of ancient wood breaking. Beneath the tundra, preserved like relics in a vast natural cryogenic vault, were the burial mounds, kurgans, of Scythian nobles, their interiors untouched by decay, their stories suspended in the icy dark. These were not ruins. They were moments embalmed by the cold. Dr. Yelena Voronina, archaeologist, archival recording. When we first opened the tomb, the air was so cold it felt like stepping into another world. And in a way, it was. The body, the clothing, even the horses, they were waiting. Narrator. The permafrost had accomplished what time alone never could. Scythian textiles still bore their brilliant dyes, wool and silk interwoven in patterns no eye had seen for over 2,000 years. Tattoos adorned the limbs of the mummified dead, intricate beasts and symbols, spiraling along sinew and bone, and with them, their horses, buried as companions, sacrifices, or perhaps guardians, harnessed and adorned as if they too might carry their rider into the afterlife. Sound, horse breath, echoing hooves, distant storm winds. But it was not just wealth or ritual that lay beneath the ice. In the Pazyryk burials, a deeper truth began to surface. The Scythians were not merely raiders or nomads. They were artists, visionaries, the keepers of a sacred dialogue between life and death. Carved deer stones and golden ornaments showed the same flowing organic forms, part animal, part myth. The Scythians did not simply decorate, they communicated through an evolving visual language of movement, ferocity, and grace. Yet the greatest shock of all came in '93. Deep in the Ukok Plateau, at the roof of Siberia, Russian archaeologist Natalia Polosmak uncovered the now famous Ice Maiden, a Scythian noblewoman buried with 6 horses and a gown woven from Chinese silk. Her body, tattooed and preserved, rewrote every assumption. Dr. Natalia Polosmak, interview excerpt. She was not a warrior. She was not a queen. She was something else. A priestess, perhaps. A guardian of something sacred. You could feel it. The silence around her was unnatural. Narrator. In death, the Ice Maiden seemed to demand reverence, but her unearthing stirred more than curiosity. Local Altai communities, descendants of the ancient steppe peoples, condemned the excavation, claiming the disturbance of her grave had unleashed a curse. Soon after, seismic tremors struck the region. Accidents followed. The whispers began. The earth, they said, had been offended. Sound, distant rumble, a muffled scream. Silence. Whether myth or coincidence, the tension between the scientific and the spiritual deepened. The tombs, after all, were more than archaeological sites. They were thresholds between worlds, between the past and the present. And the deeper one digs, the closer one comes to something else. In many of the kurgans, grave robbers had already come and gone, centuries ago. Their intrusion, sometimes apparent only by a collapsed shaft or a missing relic, betrayed a long tradition of violating the sacred. Yet, others remained sealed. And in those, researchers began to note a peculiar pattern. Professor Henrik Weiss, audio diary, translated from German. They're arranged with uncanny precision, the orientation to solstices, the positioning of bodies and artifacts. This was not improvisation. This was cosmology. Burial as geometry, a map not of the earth, but of the underworld. Narrator. The Scythians, it seemed, were not merely honoring the dead. They were communicating with something beyond, something that demanded structure, symbols, sacrifice. And buried deepest of all was the suggestion that these tombs weren't built for memory. They were built as barriers, sound, distant thump, slow, dragging breath, cold wind. What did the Scythians fear? What did they try to contain beneath the soil and frost? The tombs speak, but only in fragments. As the excavations moved farther into remote regions, archaeologists began to encounter tombs older than expected. Tombs that bore no sign of Scythian craftsmanship, yet housed remains adorned in Scythian regalia. Something was off. The bones did not match the culture. The rituals were older, more brutal. One tomb, opened under the cover of an unmarked expedition in 2011, contained a single occupant, entombed with no possessions, no horses, only walls inscribed with obscure markings and an iron spike driven through the chest. Dr. Alexei Malenko, interview. We didn't publish the findings, not officially. There were disagreements about the context, about what we'd actually found. Narrator, that tomb remains of the record. Its contents sealed once more, beneath reinforced concrete and state silence. But among those who walk the permafrost, who live in the shadow of the kurgans, the tale continues to evolve. They say the tombs are not empty, that the wind howling over the steps is not wind at all, that some graves are not meant to be opened because some dead do not sleep. Sound, whispers in wind, final breath, sudden cut to silence. As the burial mound rose, so too did the veil between the living and the dead. The Scythians believed the passage from life to death was not a moment, but a journey. Death did not sever the bonds of tribe or blood. It redefined them. A king's soul, they thought, must be guided, not only with ritual, but with blood, smoke, and shadow. The mound, or kurgan, was no simple grave. It was a threshold. Earth and sky met here. The body of the king was prepared with reverence, washed and robed, his skin anointed with oils, sometimes painted, sometimes pierced. But this was only the beginning. The mound must be filled with that which he would need in the afterlife: his weapons, his gold, his horses, and his people. And so the great ritual began. Slaves were chosen, wives too, sometimes willingly, sometimes not. The drinking of blood, the recitation of chants, the breathing of smoke, these opened the door. As the king was lowered into the tomb, still robed, still crowned, others followed. A wife, strangled with a silk cord. A servant, stabbed or drugged. His horse, its throat slit with care. All were arranged around him like stars in orbit. This was not cruelty. It was duty. The dead must not journey alone. To abandon a king to the void was to curse him. To accompany him was to be immortalized. Some accepted the fate with calm. Others fought. The mound heard all. When the tomb was sealed, fires were lit above. The earth was beaten down. Stones placed. Guardian posted. Songs sung. But silence always followed. From above, the mound looked lifeless, a grassy swell in the endless plain. But below, a court of the dead sat in stillness. Time did not pass there. Only frost. Only darkness. Archaeologists who have dared open these tombs speak of a chill beyond the cold. Tools break. Lights flicker. Air hangs heavy. The bones are arranged too carefully. The gold is too untouched, as if the dead are still watching, as if they remember. These burials were not meant to be discovered. They were not messages to the future, but seals, warnings, covenants. The Scythians did not entomb their kings for us to find. They buried them to remain buried. And when we breach the earth and peer into these silent cathedrals of death, we do not just look into the past. We look into a mirror of fear and faith, into a culture that embraced the grave as a continuation, not an end. What we see are not just bones. We see the final acts of loyalty, of violence, of love twisted into ritual. We see the line between life and death drawn thin and then crossed. Death, to the Scythians, was not a singular moment. It was a transformation, a tearing away of the visible flesh and a revealing of the eternal spirit. The rites that followed a king's death were not acts of mourning, but of necessity. They were a means of guiding the soul, securing power, and appeasing forces both divine and ancestral. The funeral was a performance that merged brutality with reverence, myth with blood. Every gesture, every cut, every uttered word carried weight. The living did not merely bury the dead. They reenacted a cosmic story. The king's body was taken from the tent where he died and paraded across the steps. His followers, sometimes hundreds, rode behind, keening, weeping, their faces smeared with ash. But not all tears were for grief. Some were ritual, some were demanded. The procession moved from tribe to tribe, collecting tribute, collecting lives. A retinue of servants and warriors was gathered, each chosen to follow the king into death. Their fate was sealed by their closeness to power. The Scythians believed that a king could not reign in the afterlife alone. Just as he ruled the land of the living, he would rule the dead. When the procession reached the burial mound, the king's body was laid upon a wooden platform. There, the real rites began. A horse, his favorite, was brought forward. Then another, and another, each one sacrificed with precision. Their bodies arranged in a ring, legs broken, skulls split, but heads held high by wooden poles as if still alive. A ghostly cavalry. Then came the humans. A wife, drugged with hemlock. A servant, strangled with braided leather. A warrior, stabbed in the heart. All were buried with the king, their bodies placed with care, their eyes closed as if asleep. There was no chaos in this, no frenzy. Only silence and the slow rhythm of earth being shoveled over flesh. Priests moved among the dead, noting to the winds, burning herbs, invoking the gods of sky and fire. They cut open the belly of the king, removed his organs, filled him with aromatic resins, not to preserve, but to sanctify. His body became a vessel, his tomb a palace. Around him, golden vessels, intricate torques, battle gear, drinking cups, and the twisted figures of mythic beasts. These were not merely treasures, they were tools. Charms against the void, weapons against chaos, symbols of his passage. And then the tomb was sealed. Logs placed over stone, soil heaped into a mound, heavy and final. But the ritual did not end there. For 40 days the mourners fasted. For 40 nights they cried to the heavens. When the days passed, a final rite was performed. The cleansing. The mourners shaved their heads, scarred their faces, and walked naked into freezing rivers. The cold water purified them. The pain reminded them they had stood at the edge of life and returned. What remains today are bones, broken and scattered, gold dulled by time, mounds half-eaten by erosion. But in every fragment, the echo of those rites remains. These were not people who feared death. They shaped it, spoke to it, bargained with it. They turned burial into spectacle, grief into theater, and memory into stone. To disturb their tombs is not just an act of archaeology. It is a disruption of an ancient silence, one forged with blood, bound with ritual, and sealed beneath the weight of the earth itself, beneath the blistering sun of the Eurasian steppe, where grass bends like whispering blades. A flicker of gold once broke through the soil. A glint, barely more than a shimmer, then another. The excavation team fell silent. Fingers, trembling with awe and fear, scraped away the dirt to reveal the curled shape of a golden panther, its fangs bared, its eyes wide with eternal rage. Then a torque, twisted and heavy, glinting like captured sunlight. And then a skull. Beneath the treasures lay the bones of a man long dead, his armor shattered, his weapons rusted, but his burial, untouched for millennia, had gleamed like a king's ransom. It should have been a triumph. Instead, the locals turned away. No one cheered. One old woman spat into the dust and muttered a single phrase, "You've unchained them." The Scythians did not bury gold for wealth. They buried it for gods. Their treasures, torques, plaques, ceremonial daggers, bridles encrusted with sunlit metal, were not currency, but covenant. Each piece was an offering, hammered in silence, placed with the dead to secure safe passage beyond this world. The gold was sacred, meant to sleep with the spirits of warriors, kings, and the animals who died with them. The craftsmanship was exquisite. Panthers mid-pounce, horses with flared nostrils, chimeric beasts unknown to natural history. These were not adornments. They were prayers, locked in metal. To disturb them was not mere theft. It was desecration. Legends spread fast, even among scientists. In the early 20th century, a Russian team near Olbia vanished in a storm after opening a burial mound. No bodies were ever recovered. In 1948, a Soviet-led expedition in the Altai found a tomb filled with untouched gold. Crowns, belts, even a funeral chariot. Within weeks, one of the team died of fever. Another threw himself into the Obi River. The third was institutionalized, unable to speak. Eek. The official reports were dry, clinical. But in the margins of a personal notebook recovered decades later, someone had scrawled, "We should never have opened it. They are watching." These incidents were dismissed quietly by Soviet authorities. Stalin had no time for superstition. Instead, he turned the Scythians into symbols, nomadic ancestors of Russian might, conquerors in fur and gold. Their treasures were proof, he claimed, of a lineage that predated Europe itself. Museums filled with plundered artifacts, and new expeditions surged across the steppe. With each find, the propaganda machine groaned to life. But so did the stories. One archaeologist assigned to the Tanais site fell into a coma days after disturbing a burial chamber. A fire consumed the Leningrad archives holding key documentation of the royal kurgans. And in Kiev, an entire wing of a museum was closed off after curators reported hearing voices in the night, chanting in a language no one recognized. Some refused to work on Scythian sites altogether. Others carried charms, wore iron medallions, or burned sage before entering tombs. They whispered of curses. Not childish maledictions, but something deeper, a metaphysical reckoning. The belief that gold, once bound to a spirit, retains that spirit's hunger. To separate them is to invite consequence. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the tombs were left unguarded. Looters came, first by night, then in open daylight. They used dynamite, pickaxes, shovels, and bare hands. Mounds were torn open. bones cast aside, treasures melted down and sold to faceless buyers across Europe, Asia, the Gulf. A torque worth a kingdom fed a trafficker for a week. But the curse did not die with ideology. If anything, it multiplied. In 1993, a known looter in Kazakhstan was found dismembered in his own home. No suspect was ever identified. In Ukraine, an art dealer who acquired several Scythian plaques died after reporting hallucinations of men on fire, speaking dead words. A German museum curator who purchased looted gold from the Black Sea region fell from a hotel window in Paris. His last message, a voicemail, never delivered, simply repeating the word return 6 times before the line cut out. It would be easy to dismiss these as coincidence, but those who work closest to the tombs know better. They speak in hushed tones of the weight gold carries, not just in grams, but in memory. Each artifact is a tether, a relic of ritual. To move it is to awaken its witness. The Scythians understood this. In their myths, rare, fragmentary, passed only by word, they believed gold came from the underworld. Not the earth, but something beneath it. A gift from the gods, yes, but a test, too. In the twilight of the steppe, where wind whispers through grass like a funeral song, there are still mounds that remain untouched. Locals avoid them. Dogs refuse to approach. And sometimes, when the air is still, a sound can be heard. Hooves, soft and distant, as though a procession of uneven riders continues forever across the horizon. The gold sleeps with the dead. But it is not dead. It remembers. And if disturbed, it answers. In the frozen silence of the Altai Mountains, where the wind howls like an ancient lament, and the ground remains locked in permafrost, the Scythians left their most enduring mark, not in stone or in words, but in ice. Here, the dead did not rot. They waited. Encased in a natural tomb of frost, their skin, their hair, even their tattoos have survived the passage of millennia. The preservation is uncanny, unnatural, as if the earth itself conspired to keep them from vanishing, as if their watch was not yet over. These frozen guardians were discovered not by kings or scholars, but by shepherds, by accident. A mound cracked open in a summer thaw, and inside, flesh. A man's hand, curled in death, fingers still clutching a dagger. His face, collapsed but intact. His mouth still stained with black pigment. And on his arms, ink. Not simple designs, but coiled beasts, horned stags, winged predators. The tattoos of a warrior, of a priest, of someone more than just a man. These were symbols of status, of belief, marks to guide him in the afterlife, or to protect him from it. As archaeologists dug deeper, they unearthed more than bodies. They found horses, buried upright, their legs cut and folded beneath them to mimic the pose of life, saddles still intact, bridles adorned with bronze and felt. Entire chariots collapsed under the weight of centuries, cloaks of fur, robes dyed with crushed plants, headdresses of gold leaf and wood, every object preserved, as if the burial had happened yesterday. But it hadn't. These tombs were more than 2,000 years old. Time, it seemed, had lost its grip. What astonished researchers even more was the consistency of these burials. Across vast distances, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Russia, the same patterns repeated, the same types of kurgans, the same sacrificial rites, the same chilling artistry in death. It was as if a single cultural pulse beat beneath the steps, a code passed down in silence. Even in death the Scythians were unified, a vast, invisible empire, stitched together not by cities or walls, but by belief and blood. Yet there is unease in these discoveries. Scientists who cut into the ice speak of the air inside, how it smells not of decay, but of something old and sour, something wrong, how their instruments falter, how they dream strange dreams during excavations. These are anecdotes, whispers, easily dismissed. But they persist. Perhaps it's guilt. Modern hands disturbing what was meant to be sealed forever. Perhaps it's the realization that the Scythians, though long dead, still hold power, that they built their tombs not to be remembered, but to be left alone. And still the ice gives up its dead. Each melt season threatens to awaken more sentinels from their ancient stillness. With climate change, what was once preserved may soon be lost, or unleashed. The barrier between past and present thins, and what lies beneath the frost no longer sleeps in peace. These are not just corpses. They are messages, not from the living to the gods, but from the dead to us. The wind howls across the steppe as it did thousands of years ago, indifferent, eternal. Beneath it lie the bones of kings, forgotten by name but not by presence. Their tombs, scattered across the vastness of Eurasia, remain sealed in silence, carved into the permafrost and soil, immune to the passage of centuries. The gold that once caught the firelight of their pyres now gleams under the sterile beams of archaeologists' lamps. Yet it offers no answers, only riddles, only shadows. We unearth their weapons, their ornaments, their horses still curled in death beside them. We catalog their wounds and marvel at their craftsmanship. But we do not find them. The Scythians speak through what they left behind, but it is not a language we fully understand. Their rituals were carved in pain and pride, their legacy folded into the earth like a blood-stained shroud. We have tried to resurrect their story, piecemeal through the smoke of cremated chiefs and the frostbitten flesh of their queens. We have imagined their battles, reassembled their faces, and named their gods. Yet the Scythians remain elusive, ghost-like. They left no texts, only tumuli. No chronicles, only scars. Their voices are gone, but their silence is deliberate. It weighs heavy, as if warning us not to mistake gold for glory, or graves for truths. For every kurgan that yields its treasures, 10 more lie untouched, hidden under fields and roads, and rivers, protected by time, fear, or reverence. And even in those opened, something always escapes, some essence that no blade or relic can reveal. In the end, perhaps this is the truest inheritance of the Scythian kings. Not their wealth, nor their power, but their capacity to endure without being known. Their bones speak not of conquest, but of resistance, to time, to meaning, to erasure. they remain monarchs in their cold, earthen halls, their dominion untouched by centuries. And we, intruders with picks and theories, are left only with fragments, standing in the wind, listening for voices that no longer speak, only echo